Gaius Julius Caesar was one of the most fascinating and powerful beings in history, from being kidnapped by pirates, marrying Cleopatra, the civil war against Pompey, and even his assassination. Let's delve into it. In the year 100 BCE, on the 12th or 13th of Quintilis, or as we know it in today's age by the less fancy name, July, a child was born in Rome who would grow to become one of history's most famous figures. Gaius Julius Caesar came into the world during a time of great social and political upheaval in the Roman Republic. His family, the Julius Caesars, claimed descent from the goddess Venus through the Trojan prince Aeneas, a lineage that young Caesar would later use to his advantage. Though the Julii were patricians, an ancient noble class, they were not particularly wealthy or influential at the time of Caesar's birth. His father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, held the position of praetor but never reached the consulship, the highest office in the Republic. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, came from a more prominent plebeian, or rather in ancient Rome, a commoner family, and would play a crucial role in shaping her son's character and ambitions. As a child, Caesar witnessed the turmoil of the social war and the subsequent civil war between Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. These conflicts would leave an indelible mark on the young Caesar, shaping his understanding of power and politics in Rome. One lesser-known fact about Caesar's childhood is that he suffered from epilepsy, a condition the Romans called the falling sickness. Far from hindering him, Caesar viewed his seizures as a sign of divine favor, likening them to the fits of ecstasy experienced by oracles. Caesar's education was typical for a young Roman nobleman of his time. He studied rhetoric, philosophy, and literature under the tutelage of Marcus Antonius Gnipho, a freedman from Gaul known for his eloquence and encyclopedic knowledge. It was during these formative years that Caesar developed his renowned oratorical skills and his passion for the written word. An interesting anecdote from Caesar's youth involves his kidnapping by pirates in 75 BCE, when he was 25 years old. While this event occurred later than his early education, it provides insight into his character. When the pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, Caesar laughed and insisted they ask for 50, as he was worth far more. During his captivity, he maintained an air of superiority, often threatening to crucify his captors, a threat they took as a joke. After his release, Caesar raised a fleet, pursued the pirates, captured them, and had them crucified, showing mercy by having their throats cut first, a promise he had made to them during his captivity. Returning to his earlier years, Caesar's father died when he was just 16, in 85 BCE. This event thrust young Caesar into the role of head of the household, a responsibility that would accelerate his entry into public life. His mother Aurelia took charge of his education and played a significant role in arranging his first marriage to Cornelia, the daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, a powerful ally of Marius. This marriage would prove both fortunate and dangerous for Caesar. It allied him with the popular faction in Roman politics, but also made him a target for Sulla, who had defeated Marius and become dictator of Rome. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia, but the young man refused, demonstrating early on the stubborn determination that would characterize his later career. Forced to flee Rome to avoid Sulla's wrath, Caesar joined the army and was posted to Asia Minor. It was here that he first demonstrated his military prowess, earning the civic crown, Rome's second highest military honor, for saving the life of a fellow soldier during the siege of Mytilene. Upon Sulla's death in 78 BCE, Caesar felt it safe to return to Rome. He was now in his early 20s, ambitious and eager to make his mark on Roman society. Rather than immediately pursuing a political career, Caesar chose to further hone his oratorical skills. He traveled to Rhodes to study under Apollonius Molon, a renowned rhetorician who had also taught Cicero. During this journey, Caesar had another adventure that demonstrated his growing charm and leadership abilities. Near the island of Pharmacusa, his ship was captured by pirates. As mentioned earlier, Caesar's behavior during his captivity was remarkably bold. What's less known is that during his 38 days with the pirates, he participated in their games and exercises, chided them for their lack of culture, and even read them his own poetry and speeches. When they seemed unimpressed, he called them illiterate barbarians, all while maintaining an air of jovial superiority. After his release and subsequent revenge on the pirates, Caesar's reputation in Rome grew. He began his political career in earnest, being elected as a military tribune in 72 BCE. In this role, he supported the Lex Plautia, which allowed the return of supporters of Marcus Lepidus, who had led a failed rebellion against the Sullan constitution. In 69 BCE, Caesar was elected quaestor and gained a seat in the Senate. During this time, he delivered two significant funeral orations, one for his aunt Julia, widow of Marius, and another for his wife Cornelia, who had died in childbirth. These speeches were not just expressions of grief but calculated political moves. By praising Marius, Caesar aligned himself with the populares faction and challenged the Sullan establishment. What you might not know about Caesar is during this period was his deep interest in genealogy. He went to great lengths to emphasize his family's ancient lineage, tracing it back to the kings of Rome and even to Venus herself. This wasn't mere vanity in Roman society. Such claims could significantly boost one's political standing. In 65 BCE, Caesar was elected aedile, a position responsible for public works and games. He used this opportunity to win popular support by staging lavish gladiatorial games and public spectacles. He even attempted to place statues of Marius on the Capitol, a bold move given that Marius was still officially considered an enemy of the state. Caesar's extravagant spending during his aedileship left him deeply in debt. This financial predicament would plague him for years and influence many of his political decisions. It's said that when he left for his governorship in Spain in 61 BCE, he quipped to his creditors that he'd return either with a fortune or not at all. In 63 BCE, Caesar achieved another significant milestone by being elected Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the Roman state religion. This was a lifelong position of immense prestige and influence. What's remarkable is that Caesar, still a relatively young man, managed to defeat two powerful older candidates for this role. He allegedly bribed so heavily to win this election that his mother, Aurelia, wept as he left home on election day, fearing he would be forced into exile if he lost. During this period, Caesar was also implicated in the Catilinarian conspiracy, a plot to overthrow the Roman Republic led by Lucius Sergius Catilina. While Caesar spoke against executing the conspirators without trial, arguing for leniency, his exact role in the affair remains a subject of debate among historians. In 62 BCE, another scandal erupted that would have far-reaching consequences for Caesar's career. During the festival of the Bona Dei, a celebration exclusively for women, a man disguised as a woman was discovered in Caesar's house. This man was Publius Clodius Pulcher, a young patrician known for his good looks and wild behavior. He was allegedly there to seduce Caesar's wife, Pompeia. Although Caesar himself was not present at the time, the incident caused a major scandal. In response, Caesar divorced Pompeia, uttering the famous phrase, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion." This period of Caesar's life was marked by a careful balancing act between building popular support and navigating the complex and often treacherous world of Roman politics. He was laying the groundwork for his future rise to power, cultivating allies, neutralizing enemies, and always keeping an eye on the ultimate prize, supreme power in Rome. As Caesar entered his 40s, his political career began to accelerate rapidly. In 61 BCE, he was appointed governor of Hispania Ulterior, further Spain. This appointment was crucial for two reasons: it allowed him to escape his creditors in Rome, and it provided him with the opportunity to gain military experience and amass wealth. In Spain, Caesar showed the first real glimpses of his military genius. He conducted successful campaigns against the local tribes, bringing the entire peninsula under Roman control. This not only enhanced his military reputation, but also allowed him to acquire significant wealth through plunder and the discovery of gold mines. I mean, his creditors back in Rome must have been smiling. A lesser-known anecdote from this period involves Caesar's visit to a statue of Alexander the Great in Gades, which would be Cadiz in today's world. Upon seeing the statue, Caesar reportedly wept, lamenting that by his age Alexander had already conquered the known world, while he had achieved nothing of comparable greatness. This moment is said to have fueled Caesar's already burning ambition. Returning to Rome in 60 BCE, Caesar found himself at a crossroads. He wanted to stand for consul, the highest elected office in the Republic, but faced a dilemma. The Senate, wary of his growing power and popularity, insisted that he give up his triumph a grand ceremonial parade celebrating military victories if he wanted to enter the city to stand for election. Choosing political advancement over personal glory, Caesar forfeited his triumph and entered the city to campaign. It was at this crucial juncture that Caesar made one of the most significant political moves of his career, the formation of the First Triumvirate. This was an unofficial political alliance between Caesar, Pompey the Great, Rome's most successful general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. The formation of this triumvirate was a masterpiece of political maneuvering. Pompey, despite his military successes, was struggling to have his eastern settlements ratified by the Senate. Crassus, while immensely wealthy, lacked the popularity and military reputation to achieve his political ambitions. Caesar provided the political acumen to bridge their interests while gaining the support he needed to secure the consulship. In 59 BCE, Caesar was elected consul alongside Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, a staunch Optimates conservative candidate. Caesar's consulship was marked by controversial and often forceful legislation. He pushed through an agrarian law to distribute public lands to the poor, a measure that was popular with the masses but resisted by the Senate. When faced with opposition, Caesar didn't hesitate to use force. In one infamous incident, he had his co-consul Bibulus dragged from the forum by lictors when Bibulus tried to obstruct the passage of the agrarian law. After this, Bibulus shut himself up in his house for the remainder of the year, ineffectually declaring unfavorable omens in an attempt to invalidate Caesar's actions. This led to the joke in Rome that the year was known as the consulship of Julius and Caesar rather than Caesar and Bibulus. During his consulship, Caesar also arranged for the influential Publius Clodius Pulcher to be adopted into a plebeian family, allowing him to be elected as tribune of the plebs. This move would later prove crucial in maintaining Caesar's influence in Rome during his absence. Perhaps the most significant act of Caesar's consulship was securing for himself an unprecedented 5-year governorship of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyricum, to which Transalpine Gaul was later added. This appointment, which was later extended to 10 years, would provide Caesar with the military command, wealth, and popularity that would ultimately pave his way to supreme power. An interesting detail often overlooked is Caesar's relationship with Servilia, the half-sister of his political rival Cato and mother of Brutus, who would later play a crucial role in Caesar's assassination. Their affair was well known in Rome, and it's said that Caesar once gave Servilia a pearl worth 6 million sesterces. Now, there's a lot of speculation around how much dollars that would convert to in today's day and age, but it would roughly be around $17 million. This personal connection adds another layer of complexity to the political landscape of the time. As Caesar prepared to leave for Gaul in 58 BCE, he made sure to secure his position in Rome. He married his daughter Julia to Pompey, cementing their alliance. He also supported the election of his allies to key positions, ensuring that his interests would be protected in his absence. Caesar's consulship and the formation of the First Triumvirate marked a turning point in Roman history. The traditional checks and balances of the republican system were being eroded, and power was increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few extraordinary individuals. As Caesar set out for Gaul, few could have predicted the seismic shifts that would occur over the next decade, both in the territories he would conquer and in Rome itself. As Caesar departed for Gaul in 58 BCE, he was stepping into a complex political and military landscape. Gaul was not a unified entity but a patchwork of different tribes, often in conflict with one another. Caesar's mandate was ostensibly to protect Roman allies and interests in the region, but he saw it as an opportunity for glory, wealth, and political leverage. The Gallic Wars, which would last from 58 to 50 BCE, began with Caesar responding to a request for help from the Aedui, a Roman allied tribe against the invading Helvetii. This initial campaign showcased Caesar's military genius. He quickly mobilized his forces, defeated the Helvetii in a decisive battle, and forced them to return to their homeland. Following this victory, Caesar turned his attention to the Germanic tribes led by Ariovistus, who had been invited into Gaul by some of the local tribes but were now seen as a threat. In a bold move, Caesar met with Ariovistus personally before the battle, demonstrating the courage and charisma that made him such an effective leader. The subsequent Roman victory established Caesar as the dominant power in Gaul. A lesser-known fact about Caesar's campaigns is his innovative use of engineering. During the battle against the Nervi in 57 BCE, Caesar's troops were surprised and nearly overwhelmed. Caesar himself had to grab a shield and fight on the front lines to rally his men. In the aftermath, he ordered the construction of a bridge over the Rhine in just 10 days, a feat that astounded both his own men and the Germanic tribes on the other side. This demonstration of Roman engineering prowess was as much a psychological weapon as a practical one. Caesar's most famous campaign in Gaul came in 52 BCE with the revolt led by Vercingetorix, a charismatic leader who united many of the Gallic tribes against Roman rule. The siege of Alesia, where Caesar's forces surrounded Vercingetorix's army, only to be themselves surrounded by a relief force, is considered a masterpiece of military strategy. Caesar constructed massive fortifications, both facing inward towards Alesia and outward to defend against the relief army. This double circumvallation, stretching over 25 miles, was an engineering marvel. Throughout the Gallic Wars, Caesar displayed not only military acumen but also political shrewdness. He regularly sent dispatches back to Rome, which were published and read aloud in the Forum. These dispatches, later compiled into his famous commentaries on the Gallic War, served as powerful propaganda tools, keeping his name and achievements in the public eye. An often overlooked aspect of Caesar's time in Gaul was his interaction with and observation of Druidic culture. He wrote extensively about Druidic practices, providing some of the most detailed contemporary accounts of Celtic religion. However, he also used the alleged barbarity of Druidic human sacrifices as justification for his conquests. Caesar's campaigns weren't limited to Gaul. In 55 and 54 BCE, he led expeditions to Britain, becoming the first Roman general to cross the English Channel. While these excursions didn't lead to lasting conquest, they greatly enhanced Caesar's reputation in Rome as an intrepid explorer venturing into the unknown. One of the most remarkable aspects of Caesar's leadership during this period was his relationship with his troops. He shared in their hardships, knew many by name, and cultivated a sense of loyalty that would prove crucial in the coming civil war. A story that illustrates this is from the siege of Gergovia in 52 BCE. When the battle was going poorly, Caesar personally led a charge to rescue some trapped cohorts, shouting, "Our men are in danger." This personal bravery inspired fierce devotion among his soldiers. As successful as Caesar was militarily, his actions in Gaul were not without controversy. His treatment of defeated enemies was often brutal, even by Roman standards. After the fall of Uxellodunum in 51 BCE, he ordered the hands of all surviving combatants to be cut off as a warning against further rebellion. Such actions, while effective in suppressing resistance, would later be used by his enemies in Rome to paint him as a tyrant. By 50 BCE, Caesar had effectively conquered all of Gaul, extending Rome's territory to the Atlantic Ocean and the English Channel. He had fought in over 50 battles, subjugated more than 300 tribes, and made Rome the dominant power in Western Europe. His military achievements were unparalleled, but they came at a cost. By some estimates, 1 million Gauls had died and another 1 million had been enslaved. As Caesar's governorship drew to a close, tensions in Rome were rising. His enemies, led by Cato the Younger, were calling for him to be recalled and tried for exceeding his authority. Meanwhile, the relationship between Caesar and Pompey had deteriorated. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, had aligned himself with the Optimates faction in the Senate. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the Roman Republic. Caesar, at the head of a battle-hardened and loyal army, stood poised on the borders of Italy. The Senate, fearful of his power and popularity, was demanding he relinquish his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. The decisions made in the coming months would plunge Rome into civil war and set Caesar on the path to becoming dictator. The Republic was about to face its greatest challenge yet. As 50 BCE drew to a close, the political situation in Rome had reached a boiling point. The Senate, led by Caesar's opponents, demanded that he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar, aware that this would leave him vulnerable to prosecution by his enemies, made a counteroffer he would give up his command if Pompey did the same. The Senate refused. On January 10, 49 BCE, Caesar made one of the most fateful decisions in Roman history. He led a single legion, the Legio XIII Gemina, or rather the 13th Twin Legion, across the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province of Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. This act was tantamount to a declaration of war against the Roman state. It was at this moment that Caesar allegedly uttered the famous phrase alia iacta est, which in English means the die is cast, signifying that there was no turning back. The crossing of the Rubicon caught Caesar's opponents off guard. Despite having superior numbers, Pompey and the Senate were unprepared for the speed of Caesar's advance. In a matter of weeks, Caesar had secured control of Italy, forcing Pompey and many senators to flee to Greece. A lesser-known aspect of this initial phase of the war was Caesar's clemency towards his defeated enemies. This policy, known as Clementia Caesaris, was as much a political strategy as it was a personal inclination. By pardoning his opponents, Caesar hoped to win their loyalty and present himself as a merciful leader rather than a tyrant. With Italy secured, Caesar turned his attention to Spain, where Pompey had strong support. In a lightning campaign that lasted just 40 days, Caesar defeated Pompey's lieutenants, famously quipping that he had come to fight an army without a general, and was returning to fight a general without an army. Caesar's next target was Pompey himself, who had gathered a large army in Greece. In a bold move, Caesar crossed the Adriatic in January 48 BCE with only a portion of his forces, risking everything on a quick victory. However, Pompey managed to trap Caesar near Dyrrhachium, leading to one of the rare occasions where Caesar admitted defeat, saying today the victory had been the enemy's if they had had a commander who knew how to conquer. Undeterred, Caesar retreated and lured Pompey into a decisive battle at Pharsalus on August 9, 48 BCE. Despite being outnumbered, Caesar's tactical genius prevailed. He anticipated Pompey's plan to overwhelm his right flank with cavalry and countered it with a hidden fourth line of infantry. This innovative tactic turned the tide of the battle, resulting in a crushing defeat for Pompey. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. In a treacherous move, Ptolemy's advisors decided to curry favor with Caesar by assassinating Pompey. When Caesar arrived in Egypt and was presented with Pompey's severed head, he reportedly turned away in disgust and wept. This moment humanized Caesar, showing that despite their rivalry, he respected Pompey and mourned the ignoble end of a once great Roman. Caesar's time in Egypt would prove eventful. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra began in 48 BCE when he arrived in Egypt in pursuit of Pompey. At the time, Cleopatra was embroiled in a power struggle with her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII. Cleopatra, then 21 years old, saw in the 52-year-old Caesar a potential ally to secure her throne. Their first meeting has become legendary. Smuggled into Caesar's quarters rolled in a carpet or, more likely, a linen sack, Cleopatra made a dramatic entrance that captured Caesar's attention. Beyond her theatrical flair, Caesar found in Cleopatra a keen intellect and political acumen that matched his own. Caesar sided with Cleopatra in the Egyptian civil war, defeating Ptolemy XIII's forces in the Battle of the Nile. He then installed Cleopatra as the dominant ruler of Egypt, nominally co-ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV. Their relationship quickly became romantic as well as political. Caesar remained in Egypt for several months, longer than was strategically necessary, captivated by Cleopatra and the luxuries of the Alexandrian court. During this time, Cleopatra became pregnant with Caesar's child. In 47 BCE, Caesar departed Egypt to deal with trouble in Asia Minor, but Cleopatra's influence remained strong. Later that year, she traveled to Rome with their newborn son, Caesarion. Caesar acknowledged the boy as his son, a significant gesture given that he had no other living children at the time, given that his daughter Julia had died in childbirth in 54 BCE. Cleopatra's presence in Rome caused quite a stir. Caesar installed her in his villa across the Tiber, and her exotic court became the talk of the city. He even had a golden statue of Cleopatra erected in the temple of Venus Genetrix, causing both fascination and scandal among the Romans. Their relationship, while genuine, was also deeply political. For Cleopatra, Caesar represented Rome's protection and support for her rule. For Caesar, Cleopatra and Egypt offered wealth, grain, and a strategic ally in the eastern Mediterranean. After securing Egypt for Cleopatra, Caesar turned his attention to Pontus, where Pharnaces II, son of Mithridates VI, was threatening Roman interests. Caesar's victory was so swift that it prompted his famous declaration, Veni, Vidi, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. The final battle of the Civil War took place at Thapsus in 46 BCE, where Caesar defeated the remaining Pompeian forces led by Metellus Scipio and Cato the Younger. Cato, rather than submit to Caesar, committed suicide, an act that Caesar claimed robbed him of the pleasure of pardoning his old enemy. With victory secured, Caesar returned to Rome in triumph. The Civil War had lasted nearly 4 years and had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Roman world. Caesar was now the undisputed master of Rome, but the challenge of governing a war-torn republic lay ahead. As Caesar prepared to consolidate his power in Rome, few could have predicted the dramatic events that would unfold in the coming years, culminating in the Ides of March, 44 BCE. On his return to Rome in 46 BCE, Caesar was appointed dictator for 10 years. This was unprecedented in Roman history, as the office of dictator was traditionally limited to 6 months during times of emergency. Caesar's position was soon made even more extraordinary when, in 44 BCE, he was named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. Caesar's first actions as dictator were aimed at consolidation and reconciliation. He pardoned many of his former opponents, even appointing some to high offices. This policy of clemency was not universally popular among his supporters, many of whom had hoped to profit from the proscription of defeated enemies. One of Caesar's most significant and lasting reforms was the reorganization of the Roman calendar. The old lunar calendar had become so out of sync with the seasons that Caesar quipped that the harvest festivals no longer corresponded with the harvest. Working with the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, Caesar introduced a solar calendar of 365.25 days, with a leap year every 4 years. This Julian calendar, with minor adjustments, is essentially the same calendar we use today. Caesar also embarked on an ambitious program of public works. He began the construction of a new forum, the Forum of Caesar, which included the Temple of Venus Genetrix, honoring his claimed ancestress. He also planned to build a grand new theater, reroute the Tiber to alleviate flooding, and drain the Pontine marshes to create more farmland. In the realm of government, Caesar increased the size of the Senate from 600 to 900 members, diluting the power of his opponents by appointing many of his supporters, including some from outside Italy. This move was deeply unpopular with the traditional aristocracy, who saw it as diminishing their influence. Caesar also addressed Rome's chronic unemployment problem by launching a program of colonization. He sent many landless poor to new colonies throughout the empire, particularly to Carthage and Corinth, which he had rebuilt. This not only provided land and opportunities for the urban poor, but also helped to spread Roman influence throughout the Mediterranean. A lesser-known reform was Caesar's law on debts. He canceled all interest payments since the start of the Civil War and deducted the interest already paid from the principal. This measure provided relief to debtors without fully satisfying creditors' demands for complete debt cancellation. Caesar also tackled judicial reform. He reduced the number of jurors and limited the speaking time in trials, measures aimed at speeding up the legal process. He also established a minimum property qualification for jurors to combat bribery. In the military sphere, Caesar reduced the size of the army but increased pay and benefits for soldiers. He also granted citizenship to many residents of Cisalpine Gaul, a move that both rewarded his supporters and expanded the pool of potential recruits for the legions. One of Caesar's most controversial acts was his reform of the grain dole. He reduced the number of citizens eligible for free grain from 320,000 to 150,000. While this was a necessary measure to control costs, it was unpopular with the urban poor who had come to rely on these distributions. Caesar's monetary reforms were equally significant. He standardized the Roman coinage system and increased the money supply by minting new coins. This helped to stimulate trade and economic growth throughout the empire. An often overlooked aspect of Caesar's rule was his attention to administrative detail. He conducted a census of the entire empire, standardized weights and measures, and began work on a comprehensive digest of Roman law. These measures, while less dramatic than his military exploits, had a lasting impact on the functioning of the Roman state. Caesar also initiated a program of public libraries, tasking his friend Marcus Terentius Varro with acquiring and organizing books for public use. This was part of Caesar's broader vision of Rome as a center of learning and culture, not just military and political power. Despite these reforms, or perhaps because of them, opposition to Caesar's rule was growing. Many senators saw his accumulation of titles and honors as a threat to the republican system. Caesar was granted the right to wear triumphal dress at all times, his statue was placed among those of the kings of Rome, and his image was stamped on coins of honor previously reserved for gods and abstractions. The final straw for many came in February 44 BCE, when Caesar was offered a crown by Mark Antony at the Lupercalia festival. Although Caesar refused it, the incident fueled fears that he intended to make himself king, a title despised in Rome since the overthrow of the monarchy centuries earlier. As resentment grew, a conspiracy began to form. Led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, both of whom had been pardoned by Caesar after the Civil War, the conspirators planned to assassinate Caesar and restore the Republic. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BCE, as Caesar entered the Senate House, the conspirators surrounded him. According to ancient sources, Caesar's last words as he saw Brutus among his attackers were "Et Brute," "You too, Brutus," or more likely, the Greek phrase "Kai su teknon you too, my child." Caesar fell, stabbed 23 times, at the foot of Pompey's statue. The assassination of Caesar marked the end of an era and the beginning of another period of civil war. The conspirators had killed Caesar, but they had not prepared for what would come after. The Roman Republic, which they had sought to preserve, would soon give way to the empire that Caesar's heir, Octavian, later Augustus, would establish. Caesar's legacy would live on, not just in the imperial system he inadvertently created, but in the lasting impact of his reforms, his military conquests, and his larger-than-life persona that has captivated imaginations for over 2 millennia. Let me know in the comments what's your thoughts on Julius Caesar. Remember to gently smash that like and subscribe buttons if you enjoyed this video.